Before we begin, we would like to note that we are talking about a sensitive issue of gender and harassment. With that said, allow me to begin. Is there more to university than sitting at a desk, studying, reading, and writing? There absolutely is more. There is a time to learn about cultures and different ways of thinking. This is a time of socializing and networking. And with these interactions and life experiences comes confusing and potentially damaging situations. Take Taylor's situation as an example. Taylor is an exchange student who went to a campus party and met a guy. She was separated from her friends and he became very forceful. She felt sexually assaulted but did not know where to go. So she went to a trusted professor who told her to seek counsel or go to the police. Taylor does not know if a police intervention is warranted and does not speak the local language. Therefore, she decides to stay silent and does not go to any more events. Or Alex. Alex is abroad for a new position as a university instructor. He said to one of his colleagues that she looked very beautiful today. He often compliments his colleague. He feels it's common in his culture. However, she feels uncomfortable and decides to report this as a reoccurring issue. She does not mention this to Alex because she feels uncomfortable addressing him. He gets reprimanded, but what did he do wrong? He never had the intention to make her feel uncomfortable and was never going to harass her. What is the problem? We believe the issue is that the university is ill-equipped to handle issues of microaggression, harassment, and assault. Take scenario one, where there was a lack of support on campus. There was no university mechanisms in order to report, and the university didn't have really a harassment policy defined. In scenario two, we can see that the cultural differences of defining harassment were different. The punishment system did not generate awareness or understanding for Alex, and the colleague should have been able to discuss this issue in the workplace. So what we saw was two issues that were similar. The cultural differences or the understanding of harassment, how it's defined, was the issue. And that is where our policy derived. So what we believe is the issue is, as we introduce, is the Erasmus Plus program. It's the Erasmus Plus Gender and Safety Harassment Program that is a set of standards across all Erasmus Plus institutions that will provide safe work and study environment through knowledge transfer, data collection, and support. Now, I'll give it over to Skand, who will explain to you what it will look like in action.
Okay, what's our proposal? Our proposal is to have a uniform gender safety and harassment policy across Erasmus network. When we mention Erasmus network, we mean that we propose it to be adopted at the Erasmus Charter. And also we propose that in coming years, the gender safety and harassment policy should also be one of the eligibility criteria for a university to be an Erasmus university. Now, one of the output which we are focusing at is gender focal person or office. By focal person or office, we mean that a safe place at the university where all the students and staff can come about and feel free to share and interact. Sorry. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we propose that the gender focal person or office should be independent and external in nature. There should be three purposes of this gender focal person or office. First is reporting and training. Second is spreading awareness about deeper understanding of cultural differences within gender spectrum. And third, the most important, counseling services, which bring us back to a safe space where students and staff can come about, interact freely, and share their thoughts about gender. Next slide. Okay, talking about the framework, about the policy, our framework stands on three main pillars. First is monitoring, second is training and workshops, and third is impact assessment. Within impact assessment, we propose that all the highest governing council of the university and along with the gender office should or must propose independent reports and qualitative surveys by the end of the annual academic year. The second is training and workshops. The office is supposed to have workshops and trainings in gender mainstreaming, safety and harassment, and cultural differences for all the staff members along with the students. Third, the most important is the monitoring by the primary and secondary authority. By primary authority, we propose that our policy should be looked after an overarching body at the Erasmus Council level. And second is secondary authority should be at the university level, the highest governing council and gender office at par, independent, working independent to each other, which brings us about at the conditionality, which is the most important part, which actually bounds all of this thing. By conditionality, we mean that in order to receive funding, the gender office and the university, it has to have independent reports and qualitative surveys, and also have enough credible training and workshops to show in the progress in the end of the year. Next slide. Lastly, from my side, how do we, when we researched about this policy, what were the gaps that we identified during the research? One of the major gaps that we found was about the cultural differences. Now, what we mean by cultural differences here in the gap, Erasmus I think is the best example where we can say that there are thousands of students from across the world with varied backgrounds which have come together and have so much of cultural differences within themselves. But even that keeping aside, Erasmus does not have any policy which incorporates the cultural differences within the policy. So, for example, when we say when complementing each other in one culture might be okay, but might not be okay in another culture, that is the issue which can come about in gender mainstreaming as well. Therefore, our policy actually proposes to bridge that gap of the cultural differences within the policy frameworks. The second most important gap that we found was the paradox of lack of research due to underreporting. Now, what does paradox mean here? When we were researching through academic papers and empirical findings, we saw that every paper started with the sentence that we don't have enough data to analyze the entire gender safety and harassment policies. Now, we don't have data. Is it because of the policy? Because we don't have a policy, or is it because we don't have a policy and that's why we don't have data? So basically, everything comes in like a feeding of a circle. That's a paradox for us. We propose that if our policy is adopted at the Erasmus level and at the university level in coming 5 years of implementation, which you can also see in the roster which we have provided you online, the entire implementation program. In the coming 5 years, our policy is going to be a catalyst for change, and we will have on-ground data to analyze the situation. Okay, now I would like to call Clara to explain to you how did we go about the research.
The research policy design was done by evidence-based research using primary, secondary research, as well as consultations. In the primary research, 91% thought that it was important to have a gender office on campus. 33% said that there was no reporting system on their last campus, and only 41% unfortunately felt that this was accessible at their current university. In the secondary research, we saw that there was underreporting, gaps of empirical findings, and there was a call from a lot of the research that we need to promote policy to mitigate gender-based violence. Finally, in the consultations, we spoke with 3 people two from campus and 1 from the University of Surrey, who had varying degrees of expertise, 1 in implementation, 1 in diversity and inclusion, and the other with legal theoretical ideologies regarding gender mainstreaming. So they really helped us solidify what our policy looked like and grounded it. But of course, we're going to need further research in order for this to be successful. The time to act is now. Safety of a growing student population is of the utmost importance. And with such a diverse cultural backgrounds of all students, it's important more now than ever to foster a safe environment for future leaders. The European Union has already flagged this as gender safety as an issue, a growing issue, which needs to be addressed at the European level. And our policy complements existing gender equity programs that are already happening. A lot of gender equity programs at the EU level have already started, but not facing harassment and gender issues from the way that we're tackling it. So we feel that this would complement existing policies extremely well. With that, I'd like to thank you all for attending the presentation. And finally note that our presentation is comprised of 6 students from 5 different continents who speak 5 different languages as their mother tongue. We are a perfect example of how the benefits of Erasmus program can bring. However, bringing cultures and ideas together in a safe space, learning and growing is really important. But we did notice that we had varying degrees of knowledge and understanding of this issue. We believe it's really important to bridge the communication gap on this issue, and it can only stop by education, and oh, thank you.
Fantastic. We can feel the enthusiasm coming through the speakers. It must have been fun to do this. And the floor is now open for questions. Our job is to challenge a bit, right? I'll be curious. And maybe I'll break the ice. I try to be challenging. I think a conceptual challenge here is between the fact that gender-based violence is perceived different in different ways in different cultures, as you say very well at the beginning with scenario 2. At the same time, you suggest a uniform rule. How do you put together uniformity and acknowledgement of diversity?
Right, so we would like to refer the training to each campus so they can create something that's more specific to each case of the universities, because as we know, there are different understanding of harassment even across the continent, which was very visible in the research, but we do still want the EU to mediate a certain level of what is understandable, what is considered as harassment. And this is where we would have further consultations with gender experts, such as we had with Constanza, Simona, and Ruth, because of course this is of course the issue of the experts, where we have to draw the line somewhere. It's the same issue with human rights. You know, the policy would give you minimum standards of what has to be upheld, and then each university would still have the room to maneuver what they find in each specific case to be the problem.
But in order to have that, there has to be a system and an office that you're able to report to. So this is really the huge gap that we're seeing, that there's no standardized way of reporting anything.
Just to complement what Clara and Rosa said, so how are we going to bridge that gap of uniformity and diversity together is through the trainings at the Erasmus level. That is what we are proposing, that before the gender office comes in place in university, we propose that the Erasmus should take it itself and train the experts at the Erasmus level, which also incorporates a standardized practice of gender mainstreaming and also cultural differences within it. Yeah.
Maybe Guy is in a better position to direct the traffic for the questions, or to ask your own questions.
Or oh, yes, we're here.
Also, you can raise your hand. I think
because then
we can see it.
I have to remember that we have 10 minutes for questions, so please, because otherwise I have a question. Are you sure you don't want to? Okay. Now, if you just go back to the design of the solution, of the policy that you presented. Okay, the framework. I just don't understand how the conditionality is going to work in this intelligent framework that you designed. But conditionality upon what? What is conditional here? If you can just
Right. So if you could refer to the one pager that we have sent in the email, it also sets it out more clearly. This is something that have come up in consultation, especially with Dr. Simona Guerra. So the original idea was, of course, the conditionality that you will only get the funding if you have a gender office. But when we thought of that, this would keep a lot of universities that are currently benefiting from having the funding and can use that funding to improve. So for us, the conditionality is not a very hard set of standards, but rather we want to be grading on a curve. So we want the funding to be dependent on improvement. This ties to monitoring very well, because in this case scenario, each university has the monitoring and reporting system, because each university will report on the number of cases and how the solutions were implemented for those cases. So it's a very much analysis on the case specific basis, and then the reports each year would have to show that there were solutions and whether those solutions were beneficial or not, and how they keep improving. So the funding is conditional on improvement rather than on a very hard set standard.
Okay.
And of course, this would be considered on the Erasmus agency of the European Commission.
Nice. Oh, more. Don't need
Online.
online questions. You have a closing statement, something you want to, a couple of minutes more.
Andrea is making political statements.
With images.
Not fair. You're having
So then just to add a little bit on the idea of the report, another thing that we thought of is we actually got an example from Canada. They have reports that are mandatory and they're public accessible. So everyone can go to the website and see what the report says on it, which we understand creates a very big incentive for the universities to have more policies. And so can they actually have to present numbers that students can see beforehand, that NGOs can see beforehand, that Erasmus could see beforehand as well. So that is an important part of our idea as well. In the reporting mechanism is that you have a survey that can be actually accessed. Gender offices have to prepare some type of report, which we have a model. Of course, we would need another type of consultation to actually understand what the model should be, what type of data should be inside it. But we already have an idea in mind that will be publicly available for everyone, so that there were more incentives as well, so that students could actually see what that university is doing before they come.
I worked at this gender office where this reporting was being done. And when we did a survey, we actually found out that particularly young women in their bachelor and people of the LGBTQ plus community were actually looking at these reports when making a decision which university to attend. So it was really important, not just for monitoring, but also for people to make decisions on where they felt safest.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, Lucas, carry on. Go, Lucas.
No, I just wanted to add that as we are really interested in the micro dynamics of gendered harassment, while we were making the consultations, a really interesting concept that both of them, no, the three of them told us was about ringing the bell. And with the reports, if people can express themselves, and in the reports, they like with the qualitative surveys, they say, for example, that certain attitude affected me or in certain way. For many people that are not aware that that attitude or that that attitude is going to harm the other, it's really, really important in order to start addressing and assessing the micro dynamics of this problem. No?
Do we have time for a quick question? For really quick, your primary research was N equals 25. Was it carried out here in Florence? And secondly, when you did the impact assessment, did you think about the cost of this initiative? I'm not saying a figure, but a range of costs.
Yes, and yes. So for the first one, yeah, we only were able to do it here. Of course, it was a limited, this would have to be expanded into several different countries. And we had discussed that a lot, what it would look like, but it was just not, there's not space in the presentation to discuss that. And the second question about budget and costs. Yes, we talked about it, particularly when we were talking about this conditionality. And what we believe is that firstly, the money will be coming out of the Erasmus Plus package that each university is getting, who is part of this institution. Now, one of the things that came up was, well, where is this money going to come from within it? And we argue that, well, if there's not money for the safety and well-being of the students, then what's the point? So this was something that we felt was very important, and that there is, over $60 billion within the Erasmus Plus program. So there is money there will be money availability for universities to cope with the students that they're getting, the diversity of students that they're getting. So it will be it will be very important for them to have that, yeah.
Additionally, it's a very good tipping point at the moment because of COVID. A lot of the money that usually goes to Erasmus Plus is not currently being distributed because a lot of exchanges are not happening. So we do argue that this now is a very good moment to implement this.
Yeah, that was brought up in our consultations as well.
Yeah, just last thing before time's up. I think we forgot to mention it within the presentation, but we intended to tell you that we also looked at international. I mean, Henrique mentioned about Canada, but we also looked at the Indian. So in India, there's this internal complaint committee, which is mandatory in all the universities and workplace across India, which looks specifically on the sexual harassment and safety of women. And it was one of the model which we also consulted. We also had a reading of researching about how that model works in India, and it's according to the research, it is really successful. But we are not copying it. But we had a consultation with the research of how that model works and how can we implement a bit of that in Europe too. Yeah.
Okay, so time is up. Thank you very much, Group 1.